Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Global Haiti series organized by the Center for Public Policy Research, which discusses various international developments and their impacts on India's foreign policy outlook. I am Dr. Dritishri Bordeloy, Senior Research Associate in the International Relations Vertical at CPPR and the moderator of today's webinar. So, on behalf of the Center for Public Policy Research, I warmly welcome you to today's Global Haiti series webinar titled The Hormuz Disruption and Its Impact on India's Maritime Trade Routes. The Strait of Hormuz has long been recognized as one of the world's most strategically important maritime choke points. Every day, a substantial share of global energy exports and commercial cargo pass through these narrow waters, making the region central to international trade and economic stability. So, the events of 2026 demonstrated how vulnerable this maritime corridor remains. And during the US Iran conflict, commercial shipping through the strait faced unprecedented disruption while most of the global attention focused on rising oil prices and the energy security, another equally important story was unfolding, one concerning maritime trade routes, logistics, shipping networks, and supply chain resilience. So, for India, whose trade is overwhelmingly dependent on maritime transport, the crisis extended well beyond the question of energy imports. Shipping companies were forced to reroute vessels, insurance premiums rose sharply, freight costs increased, transit time became longer, and uncertainty spread across the regional maritime trade networks. So, despite the ceasefire announced in June, many of these challenges have not entirely disappeared. Instead, they have prompted a broader conversation about whether India possesses the institutional capacity, infrastructure, and strategic planning required to withstand future disruptions to critical sea lanes. The crisis also challenged many of the assumptions surrounding alternative trade routes. Infrastructure that was once viewed as a hedge against Hormuz related risks, including the Chabaha port and Gulf bypass pipelines, proved far less reliable under these evolving geopolitical circumstances than was previously anticipated. So these developments now remind us the resilience cannot rely on a single alternative route or infrastructure project. Rather, it requires diversified connectivity, flexible logistics, stronger maritime partnerships, and long-term strategic planning. So today's discussion therefore goes beyond examining a single geopolitical crisis. It asks a more broader question. How can India build a maritime trading system that remains resilient in increasing uncertain geopolitical environment? So these are precisely these issues that we are going to explore in today's discussion. And it is now my privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker for today's webinar. We are honored to have with us Dr. Alvite Thaujam, Deputy Director and Assistant Professor at the Symbiosis School of International Studies, Pune. He previously served as a consultant at the Strategic Affairs Wing of the National Security Council Secretariat, the Prime Minister's office, where he handled issues related to West Asia and North Africa, including Iran. He has also worked as a senior research associate at the Vivekananda International Foundation, focusing on Middle East, international terrorism, and the Islamic State. He holds a PhD from the Center for West Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, with research on Israel's arms export and US foreign policy. His areas of expertise include Israel's foreign policy and security policy, India's Middle East relations, Sino Middle East ties, and international security. He has been a part of several prestigious international academic and policy initiatives, including a Ministry of Foreign Affairs Israel delegation in 2026, the UK's Next Generation Initiative, and a fellowship at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, Bar Ilan University, Israel. Dr. Alvite, we are delighted to have you join us today to help us understand the strategic and policy lessons emerging from the Hormuz disruption. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bordeloy, for having me this afternoon on this very interesting podcast. And I also would like to express my gratitude to all the management, at the CPPR for continuing with this sort of a very timely discussions on topics of importance, particularly when we look at from India's standpoint. So I look forward to this discussion with you.
Right. Dr. Alvite, let me begin by looking at India's immediate response to the crisis. As commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz became increasingly difficult, India witnessed a rapid shift towards these alternative maritime corridors. Shipping services along routes east of the strait increased significantly, reflecting an impressive degree of operational flexibility under these difficult circumstances. So, in your perspective, how would you assess India's overall response to the Hormuz disruption? And did it demonstrate genuine maritime resilience, or did it expose the gaps in India's contingency planning for major disruptions to critical sea lanes?
Yeah, I think that's a very pertinent question to start this discussion today. This particular episode that we had begun to see from 28 February onwards, when the US and Israel jointly, struck Iran and many of its facilities, nobody would have thought that this would be the consequences of this war. I think all of us have been under the impression that the military confrontation or the military airstrikes conducted by these two countries on Iran would lead to a downfall of the regime in Iran. Again, that's a kind of a discussion, the regional dynamics, but nobody would have thought that this particular strait, or a Strait of Hormuz, which is about 33 kilometers in width, could be used by Iran as an ultimate tool, and that we have seen very effectively being used by Iran, which also led to the Americans rethinking of how to engage with this particular conflict over the last couple of months period. Now, when we look at the concern in India, we all have felt that how this particular episode raised the temperature in the country. Particularly, it's not only about the energy shipments, but it is also about what is going to be how it is going to be affected in our own kitchens. That is the first, I would say, impact or the assessment that the policy makers or the laymen like you and me have in mind. How are we going to ensure an uninterrupted supply of energy, LPG, LNG, or the crude oil for various activities in the country, economic activities, let alone the day-to-day requirements for our household activities. So the first thing that comes to our mind is the energy security. And of course, you also rightly mentioned about the logistics part of it. When we look at in first, the energy security dimension, India consumes about, I think, 5.5 million barrels per day and imports nearly about 85 to 88% of that crude oil for our own consumption. So historically, around 30 to 45% of crude oil, are already vulnerable to Hormuz, exposure. But when this sort of a disruption occurs, it is a matter of grave concern for a country that relies heavily on, imports. And if we look at no matter, regardless of the diversification of our energy sources, over the last, I would say, 10 to 12, 15 years, we have been talking about diversification of our sources. But, regardless of those attempts, a bulk of our energy comes from Middle East or the West Asian exporters. And in that, the Gulf Cooperation Council member states have been our main sources. So when any of these countries, including Iran, we have not been buying oil from Iran from 2000, if I'm not wrong, April 2018 or 19, I think May 2019, during the Donald Trump first administration. We have not been purchasing any oil, but bulk of our oil comes from Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, and in the recent years, we have UAE as one of our major suppliers. So when none of these countries are able to export or transfer or make a transshipment of their oil through this passage, it, of course, is a matter of grave concern for us. It not only affects our, day-to-day activities like cooking, but we also had major concerns about the fertilizers. We also had major concerns about, the construction areas or the infrastructural development programs which we are undertaking right now. So we, in a way, were exposed to a little bit of a vulnerability, because you mentioned about the logistic part of it. Because even if we have to reroute, the shipments coming from this region or from other parts of Africa or USA or Russia, that will be quite expensive. If we have to carry forward that kind of a rerouting in the long term, that will be quite expensive for us. And at the same time, it will take more number of days. And one another aspect which I would like to touch about the logistic part is what we call the strategic petroleum reserve. So all of us have read in the news about when we have only about 9 to 10 days of crude oil supply in our buffer. So that again is in itself is a very I would say situation which will which will keep all of us at bay. So which means that there is a fair degree of requirement. I think we can talk a little later about when we discuss the way forward, how India could look into this kind of a scenarios. But that again is a kind of a signal that in addition to the diversification, we also need to have a good infrastructure for preserving and storing this extra amount of oil that we import from any sources, let alone the Gulf countries.
Dr. Alvite, I find your remarks naturally bring us to this another dimension of our discussion here today, the question of alternate connectivity. So, for
Hmm.
several years, India has invested considerable diplomatic and strategic capital in
Hmm.
developing alternative trade routes, which are intended to reduce dependence on, say, vulnerable choke points, maritime choke points. So, yet during this crisis, several of these alternatives, including the Chabaha port, the Gulf bypass infrastructure, it proved a little less effective than many had anticipated. So,
Hmm.
what lessons should India draw from this experience, and should India rethink its approach to maritime connectivity and route diversification? And if so, what should be the next phase of planning? How does that look like?
Yeah, I think this will. I'm sure that the policy planners in the ministries, concerned ministries, the PMO, or any other MEA, they might have already been in the process to come out with alternative solution, or if not a solution, alternatives to mitigate this kind of a challenges in the future. We often talk about, you mentioned about the alternatives in the form of connectivity projects, which we have already in the pipeline or are running at the moment. See, we often hear about the completion of INSTC or Chabahar, that those corridors could indeed save us from this sort of a problem. But let's be a bit realistic. That they are vital strategic assets. That's no doubt. And then they are essential only for our Connect Central Asia policy. But they will not be handled the sheer amount of volume, which has been handling or which we have been shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. So, which in a way also talks about the fair deal of requirement for coming out with certain innovative ideas to tackle this kind of a problem. See, if you look at during the heights of this crisis, countries like UAE, moved out of OPEC. I'm right. I think you had a podcast on the OPEC exit from UAE's exit from the OPEC as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
So once we had seen that kind of a development in the region, there were lots of discussions about how Fujairah oil port can be used as an alternative for India. That could be one way of looking at it. And UAE, of course, is one of our major partners. The other one is the Red Sea corridor. Even if we have to continue shipping from Saudi Arabia, the Saudis are thinking of using the Red Sea corridor, to make their shipments go out in times of crisis and also in during the normal period. But there is also another threat coming from, the Houthi militias, which are operating very effectively in this region. So for India, there would be a couple of choices. One would be diversify and build up our own infrastructure. So there should not be any more bottlenecks, bureaucratic red tapes in delaying in constructing several, strategic, petroleum reserves we have in Padur and Vishakhapatnam and one more, which are doing fairly well. But the volume of oil that could be stored in these storages reserves are very limited. So that, in a way, takes us to a kind of a policy where we need to implement or really push forward, kind of a port first policy. For far too long, our containers has been transshipped through foreign hubs like Colombo or Jebel Ali port in the UAE. So we need to have a kind of a policy, which I would say a kind of a port first policy, so that we do not have any difficulty in fast tracking our own very deep water shipment hubs on various coasts in the country. So fundamentally, it should be about infrastructure and also diversification. We began this conversation by talking about diversification from different sources. So infrastructure as well as diversification is very important. And also we need to increase the size of our fleet. For I think it's been most of our fleet are the foreign origin fleets that we are using right now. So we really need to increase the number of the fleet if we want to mitigate these kind of challenges in the times ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Albright. There were very important points put out, especially with diversifying and building our own infrastructure and having a port first policy. But I think while route diversification is certainly one aspect of resilience, the commercial consequences of geopolitical instability also extend much further. So the Hormuz disruption, it also what it did was expose the significant costs on the global shipping industry.
Mm.
So the freight charges increased, like I mentioned, insurance premiums had surged, transit times had become longer, turnaround times had become longer, and there was operational uncertainty, which became a part of everyday business for shipping companies. So, how should, like, moving a little bit away from what we were discussing, how should shipping industries, and like you had mentioned already previously, logistics providers and policymakers prepare for this new operating environment? What are the changes, what are the structural changes that will be necessary to reduce the economic costs of further geopolitical disruptions like the one we have just seen?
See, Doctor, I think that will be quite a challenging task. For the last several decades, I think there are a few choke points which have been internationally used by the countries from different parts of the world. One, you have the Suez Canal, then you have a Bab el Mandeb Strait, then you have the Strait of Hormuz, and very close to our eastern border, frontiers, we have the Malacca Strait. Uh, we have been only discussing what if there is a closure of these choke points, but we have never had witnessed this sort of reality. I think so. Something. When we teach West Asia to our students over here, we talk about the regional dynamics of West Asia. We always use this example of what if tomorrow there is a conflict between Israel and Iran, or Iran and the Gulf countries go into a direct military confrontation. We even had a simulation, but nobody would have thought that a strait of this kind of an importance would be taken into ransom. I would say, I may use the word within quotes, ransom by Iran. Uh, but nobody have thought this. No, we only discuss about something that you mentioned, the shipping charges, the freight insurance, the cost of the sailing, and the kind of the economic factor. But nobody had ever thought that this would be a reality at some point in time. So if I have to give you a very honest answer, I think this is something which the shipping companies will must be breaking their heads on. What are the alternatives? If you look at the topography, I think you can see the map behind me. So if you can see the map, it's only about the best way to move out of this kind of a quagmire or an entanglement is rerouting. That's the only way out. The rerouting, that for that the companies have to be a lot more shelling out a lot more money, a lot more insurance, freight charges, fuel charges will of course have to be. That could even increase the cost of this transshipment if the countries are willing to pay for it. That's the reason why many of these countries know the reality that if tomorrow the straits remains closed, and if the Iranians are not willing to, or the Americans are not willing to, because you have blockade and counter blockade by the Americans and the Iranians, and in between, the exporters from the region are sandwiched, right? So many of these ships are filled with oil and crude, and they were not allowed to be passed. So the way is diversification through rerouting. That will be, I think, one of the solutions for now. Unless and until all these countries, say for us, if we look at from India's point of view, and notwithstanding the importance of diversifying from other sources, like countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, come out with an alternative reroute, say from the Red Sea part of the western part of the frontier in Saudi Arabia, then you have a very strong connectivity corridor from Jebel Ali port, which means that you're diversifying the nodal points. So diversification of the nodal points, rerouting are some of the ways and means, but I think that will come with a cost. So this is something which we have to live with unless and until we come to an assurance that this is not going to happen anymore. But if all remains to be seen, and that they have given themselves, like as a part of the MOU which was announced on 17 July, a 60-day period is the time that Iran and US will finalize the deal. So we'll have to see how these two countries react to one another. But for the question that you asked, rerouting would be one of the ways. That's even something which we also have discussed. Otherwise, for now, we don't have any infrastructure that could really be an alternative to this kind of a very established choke points.
Noted, noted. Right. Dr. Albright, that brings us from international shipping industry to India's domestic maritime ecosystem. And since we
Mm.
focus a lot on maritime research, I would come to we also focus on ports and shipping, right? So ports, shipping, and digital supply chain infrastructure, they all play a very important and essential role in ensuring that trade continues during periods of crisis even. So the recent disruption had showed that the resilience depends not only on say alternative routes but also on the efficiency and adaptability of the existing domestic maritime infrastructure. So I would want to know, in your assessment, are India's ports and port networks sufficiently prepared to absorb future shocks, and what kind of investments or institutional reforms should receive priority in strengthening the country's overall maritime resilience?
Yeah, I think that also would be could be seen as one of the challenges. Again, I go back to my own points, reiterate my own points that this is something which none of us have thought would be the case. Uh, I just came back from Israel, last week, and there were also a fair amount of, I would say, not a surprise, but I think that gave me a sense that nobody had thought that this would be. how the war had started and how the war is now coming to a closure. Hopefully, there's a closure to this, but that remains again to be seen how these countries react to one another. When we look at the port structure or the maritime structure, I'm not an expert on maritime security or the infrastructure of this domain, but I would see, even if we diversify, even if we reroute this traffic of our shipment, not using Strait of Hormuz, but even spending a lot more money and go all the way down to Cape of Good Hope, and take it to the other parts of the world to get back our requirements, we would need rapid operational and capacity readiness, which takes us to, I would say, expanding our infrastructure in the country. We have a huge coastline on both sides of the country that can still accommodate a good amount of, if we upgrade the infrastructure, that is. Again, my knowledge might be very limited in this regard, but from a little bit of an assessment or reading that I have done, gives me a sense that there is a fair deal of a requirement for rapidly expanding the the capacity, the berth capacity, dredging capacity, yard handling. These are fast custom clearances. These are something very necessary. I would say a big necessity to convert this sort of an opportunity into a throughput. So that again ultimately boils down to how we are going to spend a lot more money in building up the for our own capacity. So again, I repeat, the berth capacity is very, very important, the yard handling and how quickly, because see, if we have a very limited space or a berth capacity, the ability to absorb this sort of a sort of a shock will also be very limited. So if we have a kind of a well-provided infrastructure within the country, and I think that is something which the Indian government is spending on right now on maritime security as well as this aspect. And I think this would be a wake-up call because if you look at the last, before uh, during the heights of this conflict, back and forth, sort of a thing between the US and Iran, attacks, counterattacks, and our shipments got targeted. So during that period of time, I think we were really, really the first, of course, priority was to ensure from where are we getting this oil, if not from West Asia, but from where are we getting it, and to ensure that there is no inflation in the country, there are no infrastructural development projects getting stymied or hampered in terms of their progression. So taken into consideration all these dynamics, it is very, very important for us to invest a lot more. Again, ultimately, it boils down to the capacity, the number of fleets that we have. Are we going to completely outsource to the foreign vendors, foreign vessels? So it's very important when the some of the, I would say, mega shipping industries in the country should take into consideration.
So, Dr. Alvite, if we were to move beyond infrastructure, another important discussion that was coming to mind was India's broader maritime capabilities, since we're talking about routes and maritime shipping lanes and alternatives and all of that. So, many have argued that a Hormuz crisis reinforces the importance of strengthening our very own maritime capacity, with, like we've mentioned, with ports and logistics, of course, but through also a larger India's flagged merchant fleet, close coordination between commercial shipping and also the Indian Navy, and
Hmm.
also stronger partnerships across the entire Indian Ocean region.
Hmm.
So, to what extent do you believe India should expand its maritime capabilities, and since we are a public policy research institute, what areas should policymakers prioritize if the objective is to build a more secure and strong and resilient maritime trading system?
Yeah, see, I think for a very prolonged period, I think I would say for a very long period of time, uh, we have been discussing a lot about our presence in the Indian Ocean region, mostly as a first responder. right? Be it in Sri Lanka, be it in Maldives, even in the Bay of Bengal, sorry, in the Arabian Sea. So we have been discussing, India. Of course, India has a reputation of being a first responder in times of crisis, which also means that we have certain capabilities for that kind of a scenario. When we look at Navy, you also mentioned about Navy. Navy is more of a deterrent, not a cargo carrier, and their responsibilities are far different from merchant ships. They can of course provide escorts and situational awareness, but they cannot lower any of these problems that we have discussed over the last few minutes, freight rates or provide LPG or any other contingency planning in terms of energy security. But I would say that if we look at particularly India's relationship with the countries in the Indian Ocean littorals, say including the West Asian, the Persian, or the Gulf countries, it is very timely that we have increased our maritime security partnership with countries like UAE, Oman. We have been doing fairly good job. This component of India's foreign policy vis-a-vis West Asia, I would say, is a new component. That is the military security in the naval domain. In the naval domain, so maritime security with Saudi Arabia and UAE. Uh, Particularly with the UAE, I think we have done some significant collaborations in the last few years. So that would be seen within the framework of establishing more robust security partnership with our own neighbors in the Western frontier, on West Asia, in West Asia. The private sector, I would say, cooperation between Indian companies or firms pertaining to maritime activities, and with that of the counterparts in this part of the world, West Asia, or even if you look at Southeast Asia, I think that will be very crucial. And again, see that this has been going on for quite some time, but lot more elements as a policymaker, what we would envisage is that there should be a lot more institutionalized mechanism, not only I would say stopgap measures, but long-term planning requires short-term, long-term, and medium-term. See, in the short term, our main priority was to ensure that there are no shocks, there are no shortages in the country. But medium and the long term are very, very important to have that industrial collaboration. I think that is something which the government also is looking forward to, industrial
Right.
collaboration in the shipping industry between these countries. So when we see these MOUs being signed between India and any of these Indian Ocean countries or on the western flank, we started to see the kind of emphasis being given on industrial cooperation. So that's when the maritime industrial cooperation would be very, very important.
Right, and we are heading to the end of the episode now. Every major geopolitical crisis leaves behind this lessons for shaping future policy. Lastly, looking ahead, Dr. Alvite, what do you consider to be the most important policy lesson from this episode, as in the Hormuz disruption episode? And what should India's future maritime strategy look like? And just to sum up about the future geopolitical disruptions, if we were to ever get ahead, like you said, like in the simulation session, sometimes we don't even think about
Mm.
certain circumstances. So if we were how to face such kind of situations and circumstances in the future, how are we to look ahead and how are we to prepare ahead?
Yeah, that's again that's a very interesting question to sum up this podcast. Uh, we have seen how this sort of a tension, the regional tension, turn into a global shock. Uh, this would be a lesson for many countries in various parts of the world, particularly in these regions, but where we have this kind of a tension, on the Taiwan Straits or in the South China Sea area, in the Indian Ocean region, and now we have seen this particular episode. Uh, Iran's maritime retaliation has exposed a kind of an uncomfortable truth, that modern geopolitics can, weaponize geography. And at the same time, immediate operational fixes matter, but deeper work is structural. No, there needs to be a lot more structural changes in terms of our policy, particularly, again, I repeat myself, diversifying our routes and suppliers would be a very, very important way forward for India. You build buffers, and at the same time, you strengthen the ports and fleets. And very, very importantly, Doctor, to accelerate the energy transition, say, particularly in the field of renewable energy. Without these steps, I think we will continue to pay a kind of a tax on trade, and so renewable energy, of course, India is doing its bit to make a transition to renewable energy. But given the size of our population and our requirement, this will take a good amount of effort, investments, and time. We need to reorient our alliances or partnerships to secure energy and shipping guarantees. That's why I would say, the cooperation that we are really building up with countries like UAE is very, very important. I have a little bit of a bias towards West Asia because that's my, area of research, not an expertise, but research. So the kind of a partnership that we are building up with the, countries in West Asia, with particularly Oman, UAE, Kuwait, these are very, very important. I think our foreign minister is traveling to 4 countries at the moment. I think this also reflects the kind of a political will that exists between India and the leadership in these countries to discuss way forward to come out with some solution, or if not a solution, some alternative to meet some of these challenges. Uh, Deepening of footprints in the Indian Ocean region would be very, very important, and also the adjacent areas, which these are again very, very important. So these are, I would say, some of the ways and means to come up as a policy in times of crisis to mitigate the challenges. Uh, your infrastructure, diversification, your Indian Ocean policy, build more partnerships, more institutional mechanisms, not only stopgap measures. This will be some of the very, very important. And I would still emphasize on the energy transition and acceleration. No, repeated shocks, strengthen political will. This should be one of those episodes where our political leadership should really increase their appetite for renewable energy, the storage capacity, and various other alternative means of acquiring fuels from possible sources, as well as producing and manufacturing in our own backyard. So these are some of the ways I would look at, for the future.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Dr. Alvite, for sharing so much thought and insightful perspectives into today's discussion. Today's discussion reminds us that maritime security is no longer just solely a naval or strategic concern, but it's become so much more than that. There's an economic necessity also involved to it, and the uninterrupted movements of commercial shipping that we spoke about is also extremely crucial for India's trade, for India's industrial growth, and also broader economic resilience. So, as recent events have shown disruptions to the critical sea lanes like we were talking about, that can quickly ripple through supply chains and increase costs, and for businesses and consumers alike, actually, for both sides, and test also the preparedness of governments as well as industries. And the Hormuz crisis has shown us that the important opportunity, and it is an important opportunity for reflection as well for us. So it has highlighted the need for stronger contingency planning, like we had discussed, and also a diversified connectivity, alternative trade routes, resilient logistic networks, and moreover, deeper maritime cooperation with regional partners as well. So I would like to thank everyone who joined us today. today, whether you are a researcher, whether you are a student, a policymaker, industry professional, or simply someone who is interested in international affairs. We truly appreciate your participation and engagement with the Global Haiti series that we are conducting here at CPPR. And on behalf of the Center for Public Policy Research, I thank Dr. Alvite for joining us on today's discussion. It has been very meaningful and very thought provoking, sir. And thank you once again for being with us this afternoon. And please continue to follow CPPR for our upcoming webinars, policy discussions, and research publications. We look forward to welcoming you again in another episode of the Global Haiti series. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Dr. Baudouin. It's been a pleasure to discuss this dynamics with you. I look forward to participating in a lot more events organized by CPPR. Wishing you all the best. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.